I never wanted to live in an HOA community. The very concept made my skin crawl. Busybodies with clipboards measuring your grass and dictating what color you could paint your mailbox. But Lake Serene Estates was different, or so I thought. My grandfather had owned a large parcel of land surrounding the pristine Lake Serene for decades. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left me the family cabin and about 40 acres, including the entire lake. The property had been in our family since before the suburban sprawl of Oak Ridge County reached this far out, and Grandpa had stubbornly refused countless offers from developers over the years. After his death, I decided to keep the cabin as a weekend retreat, a sanctuary from my hectic job as an environmental attorney in the city. The peace was glorious until Pristine Properties came along and developed the surrounding land into Lake Serene Estates, an exclusive lakeside community of McMansions with inflated price tags. I didn't pay much attention to the development at first. My property was clearly marked and separate, my cabin tucked away on the east shore of the lake, obscured by a thick stand of oak and pine trees. I had my private dock where I kept my grandfather's restored 1958 Chris Craft wooden boat, a mahogany beauty that had been lovingly maintained for generations. The trouble started 6 months after the first residents moved in. I was enjoying a rare full week at the cabin, working remotely, when a sharp knock interrupted my morning coffee on the deck. A woman with chemical blonde hair pulled into a severe bun stood at my door, clipboard in hand, wearing a navy blazer despite the summer heat. Behind her stood a man in golf attire, arms crossed and sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Good morning," the woman chirped with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Brenda Whitfield, president of the Lake Serene Estates Homeowners Association, and this is our treasurer, Richard Davenport." I introduced myself politely but stayed in the doorway, blocking entry. Something about these two immediately put me on edge. "We're making introductions to all new residents," she continued. "We didn't realize someone had moved in here. Your property paperwork seems to be irregular." I explained that my cabin predated their development by decades and that I wasn't part of their community. Richard removed his sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that swept critically over my cabin's weathered cedar siding and the natural landscaping around it. "Well, that may be," Brenda said, her smile tightening. "But now that Lake Serene Estates surrounds you, there are certain standards that need to be maintained for property values. We've had complaints about that old boat eyesore on the lake." I felt my grandfather's temper rising in me. "My boat isn't part of your HOA, and neither am I or my property. The lake isn't even part of your development." Richard chuckled condescendingly. "The lake is the centerpiece of our community, sir. Our homes are marketed as lakefront properties. Surely you understand that your activities impact everyone's property values." I pointed out the no trespassing signs clearly posted at the boundaries of my property. "This conversation is over. Please leave." As they retreated down my gravel path, I heard Brenda mutter, "We'll see about that. Nobody ruins my community aesthetic." That night, I dug through Grandpa's old files and confirmed what I already knew. I owned the entire lake, with deeded water rights that predated any development. The HOA homes might border the lake, but they had no legal claim to it whatsoever. A week later, I returned from the city to find a white envelope tucked into my cabin door. Inside was an official-looking notice from the Lake Serene Estates HOA Compliance Committee, citing my property for unapproved watercraft storage, excessive natural vegetation, and non-compliant exterior building materials. The notice demanded I remove my boat from the lake within 7 days or face daily fines of $100. I laughed out loud, crumpled the notice, and tossed it into my fire pit. Let them try. Little did I know, Brenda Whitfield was just getting started, and I was about to discover just how far an HOA president with a vendetta would go to get her way. The following weekend, I arrived at my cabin to find 3 more violation notices wedged into the doorframe. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. Citations for non-approved recreational equipment, excessive noise pollution, and my personal favorite, wildlife encouragement. Yes, they were actually fining me for having bird feeders and a small garden that attracted local wildlife. The combined fines now totaled over $1,500. with a note that they would begin accruing interest if not paid within 15 days. I called the number listed on the letterhead and got Brenda's voicemail. I left a calm but firm message explaining again that my property was not part of their HOA and requesting they stop leaving notices. I also sent a formal letter via certified mail stating the same, keeping a copy for my records. The next day, I decided to take my boat out. The vintage Chris Craft gleamed in the sunlight as I guided it slowly from my dock. I hadn't gone 50 yards before I heard shouting from the shore. Richard Davenport stood on his expansive lakefront deck, waving his arms frantically. "You need to remove that immediately," he shouted through a bullhorn. "That boat doesn't meet HOA watercraft specifications." I waved cheerfully and continued my cruise around the lake. As I passed other homes, I noticed residents coming out to stare. Some looked annoyed, likely having been fed misinformation by Brenda, but others waved pleasantly. One elderly couple even gave me a thumbs up. Later that afternoon, I was working on my laptop when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Deputy Collins. We received a complaint about illegal boating activities on this lake." I invited him in and calmly explained the situation, showing him my property deed and the documentation of water rights. The deputy, a reasonable man, nodded as he reviewed the paperwork. "Looks like you're in the clear legally, sir. I'll let the complainants know this is a civil matter, not criminal." But he hesitated. "I've dealt with Mrs. Whitfield before on other calls. She can be persistent." The deputy wasn't wrong. The next day was Sunday, and I was awakened at 7 a.m. by the sound of an air horn. I stumbled onto my deck to see Brenda, Richard, and about 5 other people in matching Lake Serene Estates polo shirts standing at the edge of my property. Behind them, a tow truck idled ominously. "This is your final warning," Brenda announced through a megaphone. "The non-compliant vessel must be removed by sundown, or we will be forced to take action." I grabbed my phone and began recording. "You are trespassing on private property," I called out. "And if you touch my boat, I'll have all of you arrested for theft and destruction of property." Richard stepped forward. "We have authorized lake access for all HOA members. It's in the covenants." "Your covenants don't apply to my property or the lake, which I own," I replied, "and you know it." Something ugly flashed across Brenda's face. "We'll see about that. The board has unanimously voted to pursue all available remedies for your continued violations." They retreated, but the implied threat hung in the air. That afternoon, I installed security cameras covering my property line, dock, and boat. I had a feeling things were about to get much worse. I wasn't wrong. Monday morning, I reluctantly returned to the city for work, leaving my boat secured at my dock as always. At lunch, I checked my security camera feed on my phone and nearly choked on my sandwich. A Lake Serene Estates maintenance truck was parked at the edge of my property, and 2 workers were stringing a floating barrier of buoys across a section of the lake, effectively cutting off access from my dock to the main body of water. I immediately called my friend Lisa, a fellow attorney who specialized in property law, and explained the situation. "They've gone too far," she said. "This is textbook harassment and probably illegal imprisonment of your property. Document everything. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter right now." By the time I made it back to the cabin that evening, the buoys had been removed, likely because someone with common sense had pointed out the legal disaster they were courting. But a new notice awaited me, this one printed on heavy cardstock with the HOA's gold-embossed logo. Notice of hearing, it proclaimed in bold letters. The Lake Serene Estates HOA board would be holding a special session to discuss ongoing violations and enforcement actions regarding non-compliant lakefront properties. My property was specifically mentioned by address, despite not being part of their jurisdiction. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday at 9 a.m. in the development's newly constructed clubhouse. I decided it was time to attend an HOA meeting, not as a member, but as the rightful owner of the lake they had built their entire community around. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and who else besides Brenda and Richard might be driving this vendetta. As I read through the formal notice again, something caught my eye. In the fine print at the bottom was a line mentioning that the HOA board had consulted with Pristine Properties regarding water access rights and community amenities. That was interesting. The developer was still involved. I made a note to look into pristine properties more carefully. If the developer had misrepresented lake access rights to home buyers, that could explain why the HOA was coming after me so aggressively. I spent the rest of the evening researching HOA law and property rights, preparing for what was sure to be a contentious meeting. Whatever game Brenda and her cronies were playing, I wasn't about to let them win. Saturday morning arrived with an ominous bank of dark clouds rolling in from the west. Appropriate weather, I thought, for the storm I was about to walk into. I arrived 15 minutes early for the HOA meeting, dressed in slacks and a button down. Professional, but not trying too hard. The Lake Serene Estates clubhouse was as pretentious as I'd expected. All stone and glass, with a massive chandelier and walls adorned with artistic renderings of the lake. My lake. The room was already half full with homeowners, many of whom gave me curious glances as I took a seat in the back. At precisely 9 a.m., Brenda strode in with Richard and 3 other board members in tow. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and carried a leather portfolio embossed with the HOA logo. "Good morning, everyone," she began with practiced charm. "Thank you for joining us for this special session. We have several important matters to discuss regarding the preservation of our community standards and property values. For the next 30 minutes, I listened to mundane HOA business, approval of previous minutes, treasurer's report, and discussions about upgrading the communal mailbox area. Then Brenda cleared her throat and fixed her gaze on me. Now to our special agenda item. As many of you know, we have had ongoing issues with a non-compliant property on the eastern shore. She gestured to a large aerial photo of the lake that highlighted my cabin in red. The owner has refused to adhere to our community standards and has been operating an unauthorized, non-compliant watercraft that poses both aesthetic and safety concerns. A murmur ran through the crowd. I stayed silent watching. Additionally, Brenda continued, the board has discovered a potential issue with lake access rights that affects all homeowners. When pristine properties developed our community, certain assurances were made regarding the lake's status as a community amenity. Richard stepped forward with a PowerPoint clicker. If I could direct your attention to the screen, we have the original marketing materials that clearly advertise full lake access and community water privileges for all homes. An older man in the second row raised his hand. I don't understand. Are you saying we don't have the right to use the lake? That's why we pay premium prices for these homes. Brenda's smile was tight. That's exactly the concern, Mr. Grayson. It seems the developer may have overstated certain aspects of our lake rights. The board is working diligently to resolve this issue. This was my cue. I stood up. Perhaps I can clarify the situation. All heads turned toward me. Brenda's eyes narrowed dangerously. My name is James Mitchell. I own the property that your board has been harassing with illegal notices and fines. I also own Lake Serene itself, with full water rights dating back to 1953 when my grandfather purchased the entire parcel. The room erupted in shocked conversations. Brenda slammed a gavel repeatedly. This is not an open forum, Mr. Mitchell. You are not a member of this association and have no standing to speak here. I remain standing. I'm speaking as the property owner whose rights you're attempting to violate and as the legal owner of the lake that you've been misrepresenting to these homeowners. A woman with silver-streaked hair stood up. I paid an additional $75,000 for a lakefront lot. Are you saying I don't have any rights to use the lake? Before I could answer, Richard jumped in. Mrs. Chen, I assure you, the board is addressing this issue. We've consulted with legal counsel, and there are measures we can take to secure our community's interests. Such as? I asked pointedly. Brenda's face flushed with anger. This is not the appropriate forum for this discussion, Mr. Mitchell. If you wish to address the board, you can schedule a hearing through proper channels. A younger man near the front raised his hand. I'd like to hear what he has to say, actually. We all would. Several homeowners nodded in agreement. Brenda looked like she might explode, but Richard whispered something in her ear, and she reluctantly nodded. You have 2 minutes, she said icily. I took a breath. I have never restricted anyone from reasonably enjoying the lake for swimming or non-motorized boats like canoes and kayaks. What I object to is your HOA attempting to control my property and my grandfather's boat, which has been on this lake for over 60 years, long before any of your homes existed. I held up the stack of violation notices. These are not just inappropriate, they're illegal harassment. I'm not part of your HOA, and you have no jurisdiction over my property. But the lake affects all of us, Richard interjected. Surely you understand that your unconventional property impacts everyone's home values. My unconventional property was here first, I replied, and I have documentation showing that Pristine Properties was fully aware of the lake ownership situation when they developed this community. That caused another stir. A man in an expensive golf shirt stood up. I'm Jim Harrington. I own Lot 42. Are you saying the developer knew they were selling us lakefront properties without actual lake rights? Exactly. I confirmed. The deeds to your properties end at the shoreline. The lake itself remains private property. Brenda stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled fury. That's enough. This meeting is not the place for unsubstantiated accusations against Pristine Properties, a respected developer who has created countless beautiful communities. Something clicked in my mind. You worked for Pristine before becoming HOA president, didn't you, Brenda? Her momentary hesitation told me everything. My professional background is not relevant here. It is if you're using your position as HOA president to cover up the developer's misrepresentations, I suggested. The room had grown tense. Richard stepped in, his voice oily with fake reasonableness. Perhaps we should all take a step back. Mr. Mitchell, the board would be happy to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding lake access and aesthetic considerations. I understood the implied threat. Play ball with us, or we'll make your life miserable. I'm open to reasonable discussion, I replied carefully, but not under duress or continued harassment. As the meeting dissolved into heated conversations among homeowners, a middle-aged woman approached me. I'm Margaret Wilson, Lot 17. Not all of us agree with Brenda's methods. Some of us just want to live in peace. She handed me her card. She was a retired judge. Call me if you need anything. That boat of yours is beautiful, by the way. My father had one similar. As I left the clubhouse, I noticed Brenda huddled with Richard and a man in an expensive suit I hadn't seen before. They watched me leave with expressions that could only be described as predatory. That afternoon, I was not entirely surprised to find yet another notice on my door, this one informing me that the HOA board had voted to restrict lake access for non-compliant properties and would be installing a security barrier around the lake perimeter the following week. They were escalating and dramatically. I called Lisa immediately and described the meeting and the new threat. They can't do that, she said firmly. They have no right to restrict your access to your own property. This has gone beyond harassment into potential criminal territory. What's my next move? I asked. Document everything and prepare for things to get ugly, Lisa advised. I think we need to get ahead of this with an injunction. And James, be careful. HOA boards with overinflated senses of power can be surprisingly dangerous. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, I discovered my dock had been vandalized during the night. Someone had spray painted "Remove Eyesore Boat" across the weathered wood planks, and one of my security cameras had been smashed. The battle lines had been clearly drawn, and it was time for me to start fighting back. The vandalism of my dock was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated in ways I couldn't have imagined. First, the HOA installed "No Trespassing" HOA private property signs along the entire shoreline, including at the boundaries of my land. When I removed the ones on my property, I received a threatening letter from an attorney representing the association, claiming I had destroyed community property. Then came the patrol boat, a sleek white pontoon with Lake Serene security emblazoned on the side. Richard Davenport himself captained this ridiculous vessel, cruising slowly past my dock several times daily, taking photos and notes. Whenever I took my grandfather's Chris Craft out, the security boat would follow at a distance, documenting my violations. But the real breaking point came on a Friday evening in late August. I had invited a few friends over for a lakeside barbecue, something I'd done countless times over the years. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, we heard the unmistakable sound of a motor approaching. The security pontoon appeared around the bend, but this time it wasn't just Richard. Brenda sat regally at the bow, and beside her was a uniformed security guard I hadn't seen before. As they drew closer to my dock, the guard raised what looked like a camera with an unusually large lens. "Is that guy filming us?" my friend Miguel asked incredulously. Before I could answer, a blinding light flashed across my property. They were using some kind of spotlight to disrupt our gathering. "This is Lake Serene Security," Brenda's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "You are in violation of community noise ordinances and unauthorized gathering protocols. Please disperse immediately." My friends looked at me in confusion. I was livid but tried to maintain my composure as I walked to the edge of my dock. "You are trespassing on private waters," I called back. "Turn off that light and leave immediately." The spotlight remained fixed on us. "This is your final warning," Brenda continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Continued violations will result in further enforcement actions." That's when something in me snapped. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I need to report trespassers harassing me on my property," I told the dispatcher. "They're using high-powered lights to intimidate me and my guests, and I'm concerned for our safety." As I was speaking, Richard gunned the pontoon's motor, circling close enough to my dock to create a wake that rocked my boat against its moorings. The security guard continued filming the entire incident. By the time Sheriff's Deputy Collins arrived 20 minutes later, Brenda and her goon squad had retreated, but not before shouting one final threat. "The board meeting on Monday will address your continued defiance. Prepare for serious consequences." I showed Deputy Collins my security footage of the incident, as well as the damage to my dock from earlier in the week. "This is getting out of hand," he admitted, shaking his head. "But it's still technically a civil matter unless someone gets hurt or there's significant property damage. So they can just keep harassing me until something worse happens." I asked in frustration. "Document everything," he advised, echoing Lisa, "and maybe consider getting a restraining order." After he left, my barbecue thoroughly ruined, I sat alone on my dock watching the stars reflect on the lake's surface. This place had been my sanctuary, my connection to my grandfather, and our family history. Now it was becoming a battleground. I pulled out my laptop and began researching everything I could find about Pristine Properties, the developer behind Lake Serene Estates. Something wasn't adding up about their involvement in this vendetta against me. After several hours of digging through county records, news articles, and business filings, I discovered something interesting. Brenda Whitfield wasn't just a former employee of Pristine Properties. She was the founder's daughter-in-law, and Richard Davenport was listed as a minor investor in the company. Even more telling, Pristine had 3 more phases of Lake Serene Estates planned, with dozens of additional lakefront lots that would sell for premium prices, but only if the lake access issue was resolved in their favor. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about my boat or my non-conforming cabin. This was about money, millions in potential profits that depended on controlling access to my lake. The next morning, I received an official-looking envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a legal notice informing me that the Lake Serene Estates HOA would be holding an emergency board meeting to vote on immediate remediation measures regarding my property, including authorization to remove hazardous and non-compliant structures and vessels for the safety and well-being of the community. They were planning to take my boat. I called Lisa immediately, and she agreed to meet me at the cabin that afternoon. When she arrived, her normally calm demeanor was replaced with cold anger as she reviewed the documents I'd gathered. "This is beyond ridiculous," she said. "They're not just harassing you now. They're planning to commit outright theft. We need to act immediately." We spent the rest of the day preparing legal documents, an application for a temporary restraining order against the HOA, Brenda, Richard, and Pristine Properties, as well as a civil complaint alleging harassment, conspiracy, and fraud. "File these first thing Monday morning," Lisa instructed. I'll make sure they're expedited. But James, you need to be careful this weekend. Based on everything that's happened, I wouldn't put it past them to try something before the courts open on Monday. Her warning proved prescient. At dawn on Sunday, I was awakened by the sound of engines, multiple engines, approaching my dock. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside in my pajamas to find 3 boats lined up at the edge of my property: the security pontoon, a larger workboat with a crane attachment, and a third vessel carrying several men in work clothes. Brenda stood on the pontoon, megaphone in hand, with Richard and the security guard flanking her. Behind them, a small crowd of homeowners had gathered on the community dock across the lake, watching the spectacle unfold. James Mitchell, Brenda's amplified voice echoed across the water, by unanimous vote of the Lake Syrian Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors. Your continuing violations have been deemed a hazard to community safety and property values. We are hereby removing the unauthorized vessel from community waters. The workboat began moving toward my dock where my grandfather's Chris Craft was moored. I ran to the end of the dock, positioning myself between them and my boat. This is private property. You have no legal right to be here or to touch my boat. We have every right, Richard called back smugly. The lake is a community resource, regardless of your supposed ownership claims. I held up my phone. I'm recording all of this. If you touch my property, it's theft, plain and simple. I've already filed for a restraining order against all of you. The workboat hesitated, but Brenda wasn't backing down. Proceed as planned, she commanded the work crew. In desperation, I made one more call, not to the sheriff this time, but to Judge Margaret Wilson, who had given me her car at the HOA meeting. Despite the early hour, she answered. They're trying to take my boat, I explained quickly. Right now. With a crane. Put me on speaker, she said firmly. I did as instructed, holding my phone toward the approaching workboat. This is Judge Margaret Wilson. Her authoritative voice rang out. I am witnessing what appears to be an attempted theft and trespassing via video call. Unless everyone disperses immediately, I will personally make calls to have all involved arrested and charged. The effect was immediate. The workboat's engine cut off, and the crew looked uncertainly toward Brenda, whose face had gone pale. This is a community matter, not a legal one. She tried to argue, but the conviction had drained from her voice. It became a legal matter the moment you attempted to take property that doesn't belong to you. Judge Wilson replied, I suggest you leave now, while you still can. After a tense standoff that felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Brenda finally signaled retreat. As the boats pulled away, she shouted back at me, This isn't over, Mitchell. Not by a long shot. She was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But what Brenda didn't realize was that her dramatic attempt to seize my boat had just handed me exactly what I needed to fight back. Clear evidence of their illegal actions, witnessed by a judge, no less. As I watched them retreat, I felt something shift inside me. I was done being on the defensive. Tomorrow, when the courts opened, I would begin my counterattack. And I wouldn't stop until Brenda Whitfield and her corrupt HOA faced the full consequences of their actions. The lake rippled in the morning light, my grandfather's boat bobbing gently at the dock. Don't worry, I whispered, patting the Chris Craft's polished mahogany hull. They're not going to take you anywhere. Monday morning arrived with a sense of grim determination. I was at the county courthouse when it opened at 8 a.m., Lisa at my side with a thick folder of documents. We filed everything we had prepared. The request for a temporary restraining order, the civil complaint, and most critically, a quiet title action to definitively establish my ownership of Lake Syrian once and for all. Given yesterday's events and Judge Wilson's statement, we should get the TRO without much difficulty, Lisa explained as we waited to be called before a judge. The quiet title action will take longer, but it should prevent them from making any more moves against your property while it's pending. She was right. By 10 a.m., we had a temporary restraining order prohibiting Brenda, Richard, the HOA, and Pristine Properties from entering my property or the lake without my permission, attempting to remove or interfere with my boat, or posting signage on or around the lake. Now for Phase 2, I said as we left the courthouse. Time to involve more of the homeowners. During my research, I had discovered that many Lake Serene residents were unhappy with Brenda's dictatorial management of the HOA, but most were too intimidated to speak out. Judge Wilson had given me contact information for a few like-minded homeowners who were equally frustrated with the board's tactics. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my cabin for 5 homeowners who Judge Wilson had assured me were trustworthy. Among them were Jim Harrington, the man who had spoken up at the meeting, and Elena Chen, who had paid the premium for her lakefront lot. "Thank you all for coming," I began, once everyone had settled in with drinks on my deck overlooking the lake. "I know it's risky for you to be seen here, given the current situation. Less risky now that you've got that restraining order," Jim chuckled. "Word about yesterday's failed boat heist spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Brenda's furious." "Good," I replied, "but I didn't invite you here to gloat. I invited you because I think we all want the same thing, to enjoy this beautiful lake without constant drama and overreach from the HOA." Elena nodded emphatically. "The lake view is why I bought my home." "I don't care about your boat. It adds character to the place. What I care about is knowing what my actual rights are regarding lake access." "That's fair," I acknowledged. "And I want to be clear. I've never intended to prevent residents from swimming, fishing, or using non-motorized craft on the lake. My issue is with the HOA's attempts to control my property and the false claims the developer made about lake rights." I laid out everything I'd discovered about Brenda's connection to pristine properties and the planned expansion that depended on resolving the lake rights issue. My guests were shocked. "So this entire crusade against you is about protecting the developer's profits on future phases?" Jim asked incredulously. "And maintaining the inflated values of existing homes," I added. "If buyers knew they were getting lakefront views but not actual lake rights, the properties would be worth significantly less." A retired accountant named Harold removed his glasses thoughtfully. "That explains why our HOA fees are so high compared to similar communities. I bet a significant portion is going to their legal fund to fight you." "You're probably right," I agreed, "which brings me to why I asked you here. I'm going to continue my legal battle against the HOA's leadership and the developer, but I could use allies within the community." "What exactly are you proposing?" Elena asked cautiously. I outlined my plan. While I pursued my legal case, they would work from within to demand transparency from the board about HOA finances, the true status of lake rights, and Brenda's connections to pristine properties. Meanwhile, I would draft a fair and reasonable lake use agreement that would guarantee homeowners certain access rights while preserving my ownership. If enough homeowners realize they've been misled, not by me but by the developer and the board, the pressure might force Brenda and Richard to resign. I explained. With a more reasonable board in place, we could reach an amicable agreement that works for everyone. By the end of the evening, all 5 had agreed to help. Judge Wilson would quietly reach out to other sympathetic homeowners, and Jim, who had experience in corporate communications, would create an anonymous newsletter to distribute factual information about the lake dispute to counter Brenda's narrative. The next phase of my plan required more research. Using my professional contacts, I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Pristine Properties' business practices and Brenda's involvement with the company. Within days, he had uncovered a pattern of similar behavior at other developments: misleading marketing about amenities, aggressive HOA tactics to cover up discrepancies, and even financial improprieties in HOA accounting. Most damning of all, he discovered that Brenda was still on Pristine's payroll as a community relations consultant, a clear conflict of interest with her position as HOA president. Armed with this information, I scheduled a meeting with the county prosecutor's office to discuss possible fraud charges. The assistant DA listened attentively to my evidence, but cautioned that criminal charges would require more substantiation. "Keep building your civil case," she advised. "If we see enough evidence of systematic fraud, we might get involved. But for now, this remains primarily a civil matter." Meanwhile, Jim's anonymous newsletter had begun circulating through Lake Serene estates, raising uncomfortable questions about the board's transparency and the true status of lake access rights. Brenda responded with her own community-wide email condemning the malicious misinformation and defending the board's actions as necessary to protect community interests. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. At the next regular HOA meeting, which I monitored through updates from my allies, several homeowners demanded to see documentation of the lake rights that had been promised in their purchase agreements. Brenda deflected, claiming the documents were under review by legal counsel, but the previously compliant audience was growing skeptical. The situation reached a turning point 3 weeks into our counter-campaign when my private investigator made a crucial discovery: internal emails between Brenda, Richard, and Pristine's owner discussing the need to resolve the lake situation before Phase 3 marketing begins, and explicitly acknowledging that I owned the water rights. "We need to control the narrative," Brenda had written. "If buyers realize the lake access is in dispute, we'll never sell those premium lots." I immediately forwarded these emails to Lisa, who filed them as supplemental evidence in our case. She also sent copies to the local newspaper, which had been following the increasingly public dispute with interest. The following day, the Oak Ridge County Herald ran a front-page story: "Developer, HOA accused of misleading homebuyers about lake rights in luxury community." The article detailed the emails and quoted several anonymous homeowners who felt they had been deceived. Brenda's response was swift and desperate. That evening, every Lake Serene resident received an emergency communication from the board announcing a special meeting to address malicious falsehoods and protect community interests at all costs. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Thursday in the clubhouse. By 6:30, the parking lot was overflowing, with residents parking along the winding roads of the development. This wasn't going to be the usual sparsely attended gathering where Brenda and her cronies could railroad through whatever they wanted. Judge Wilson had advised me to stay away. My presence would only inflame tensions, and my allies within the community were well prepared to represent my perspective. Instead, I watched from my cabin deck through binoculars as homeowners streamed into the clubhouse. Many were carrying copies of Jim's newsletter or the newspaper article. At 8:45, my phone exploded with texts from Jim, Elena, and the others. "Complete meltdown," Jim wrote. "Brenda lost it when people demanded financial records." Elena's message was more detailed. "Richard admitted they've spent over $50,000 from the HOA legal fund fighting you already. People are furious. Judge Wilson called me directly." "I thought you should hear this from me," she said, her voice tense with controlled excitement. "The board just lost a no-confidence vote. It was overwhelming -42-7. What happens now?" I asked, watching distant figures streaming out of the clubhouse into the warm evening air. "According to the bylaws, an interim board will be appointed until formal elections can be held. I've been asked to head the interim board, given my background. I've accepted." I felt a surge of hope. "That's incredible news, Margaret. Congratulations." "Don't celebrate yet," she cautioned. "Brenda isn't going down without a fight." As she was leaving, she said something about having other options to protect the development's interests. Whatever that means, it can't be good. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, I received a certified letter, not from the HOA this time, but from the law firm of Whitfield, Davenport and Associates, representing Pristine Properties. The developer was filing a lawsuit against me for tortious interference with business relationships and defamation, seeking millions in damages for the impact on their Phase 3 sales. I forwarded the letter to Lisa, who called me immediately. "This is pure intimidation," she said. "They're trying to bury you in legal fees." Fortunately, their case is even weaker than the HOA's. The emails we uncovered show they knew about the lake ownership issue all along. "So what's our next move?" I asked. "Counter with everything we've got," Lisa said firmly. "I'll file our response to their lawsuit with a motion to dismiss and hefty counterclaims. But James, there's something else we should consider." "What's that?" "Going public with the whole story. Not just the local paper, but state media. Pristine Properties has developments all over the region. If other homeowners start questioning their amenity rights," the implication was clear, We could create a PR nightmare for the developer that would dwarf any issues at Lake Serene Estates. I agreed, and Lisa began reaching out to her media contacts. Meanwhile, Judge Wilson and the interim HOA board wasted no time. They hired an independent accountant to audit the association's books and an attorney who specialized in HOA law to review all contracts and legal actions taken by the previous board. The audit results were damning. Not only had Brenda and Richard misappropriated funds for their campaign against me, but they had also been steering maintenance contracts to companies owned by friends and family at inflated prices. The attorney's review revealed that the previous board had violated numerous state laws governing HOAs, including holding unannounced meetings and making decisions without proper votes. Armed with this evidence, Judge Wilson called an emergency community meeting. This time, I decided to attend. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was electric as I walked in. Conversations hushed momentarily as people recognized me, then resumed with increased intensity. I took a seat near the back, nodding politely to those who caught my eye. Judge Wilson called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of the gavel, the same gavel Brenda had wielded so imperiously just weeks before. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As promised, the interim board has conducted a thorough review of the association's finances and legal standing. I wish I could say the results were merely concerning. They are, in fact, alarming." She proceeded to outline the audit findings in clear, methodical detail, her judicial experience evident in her presentation of the facts without emotional coloring. When she finished, the room erupted in angry questions and exclamations. "Where is Brenda now?" Someone shouted. Ms. Whitfield and Mr. Davenport were invited to this meeting but declined to attend, Judge Wilson replied. Their attorney advised them to have no further contact with the association. Another resident stood. "Are we going to press charges? The board has referred our findings to the district attorney's office for review," Judge Wilson confirmed. "Whether criminal charges are filed is up to them. However, the board has unanimously voted to file a civil suit against the former officers to recover misappropriated funds." The meeting continued for another hour as residents expressed their anger and betrayal. Finally, Judge Wilson raised her hand for silence. "There's one more item we need to address tonight," she said, her gaze finding me in the back of the room. "The lake." All heads turned toward me. Judge Wilson continued. "Mr. Mitchell has joined us this evening at my invitation. As many of you now know, the developer and former board misrepresented the status of lake access rights when you purchased your homes. Mr. Mitchell does, in fact, own the lake. However, she raised her voice slightly as murmurs broke out. He has expressed willingness to discuss a formal agreement that would guarantee certain access rights for all homeowners." She nodded to me. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to address the community?" I walked to the front of the room, feeling dozens of eyes tracking my movement. Standing at the podium, I took a deep breath. "I want to start by saying that I never wanted conflict with any of you," I began. "My grandfather loved this lake, as do I. It's never been my intention to prevent residents from enjoying the water." I explained my perspective, how the developer had built around my property without proper consultation, how the former board had harassed and threatened me, and how all I had ever wanted was respect for my property rights and family history. "What I'm proposing is simple," I continued. "A formal easement agreement that guarantees all homeowners the right to swim, fish, and use non-motorized watercraft on the lake. In exchange, I ask only that my ownership be acknowledged, that reasonable limitations on motorized craft be accepted to prevent overcrowding, and that my grandfather's boat be allowed to remain as it has for 60 years. The response was cautiously positive. Many residents asked practical questions about specific activities or potential limitations. I answered each honestly, emphasizing my desire for a fair solution rather than punitive restrictions. As the meeting wound down, Judge Wilson summarized the next steps. The interim board would work with me and their attorney to draft a formal agreement for the community to review. In the meantime, the restraining order against the former board members remained in effect, and the lawsuit against Pristine Properties would proceed. As people filed out, many stopped to introduce themselves or express support. One elderly gentleman shook my hand vigorously. "My father had a boat just like yours. he said with a nostalgic smile. Seeing it on the lake reminds me of my childhood. I'm glad you fought for it. Driving back to my cabin that night, I felt a weight lifting. The battle wasn't over. Pristine Properties and the former board members would still fight to protect themselves, but for the first time, I had allies instead of enemies in the community around my lake. The next few weeks brought rapid developments. Lisa's media contacts came through, and stories about Pristine Properties' deceptive marketing practices began appearing in newspapers and on local TV stations across the state. Other communities developed by the company started asking questions about their own amenities and HOA structures. The pressure mounted until Pristine's CEO, Marcus Whitfield, Brenda's father-in-law, reached out through intermediaries to discuss a settlement. His initial offer was insultingly low, but after several rounds of negotiation, we reached terms that acknowledged my ownership of the lake, provided compensation for the harassment I'd endured, and required Pristine to establish a fund for Lake Serene Estates to offset maintenance costs for the lake they had marketed so prominently. Brenda and Richard faced their own reckonings. The district attorney ultimately declined to file criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence of intent, but the civil suits from both me and the HOA proceeded. When evidence emerged that they had discussed vandalizing my dock in text messages, their insurance company refused to cover their legal defense, forcing them to settle. By early autumn, a remarkable transformation had taken place. The interim board, led by Judge Wilson, had drafted a lake use agreement that balanced my rights as the owner with reasonable access for residents. The document was approved by an overwhelming majority of homeowners and officially recorded with the county. My grandfather's Chris Craft remained where it had always been, now joined by a small flotilla of canoes, kayaks, and paddleboards that homeowners could launch from the community dock. The Lake Serene Security Pontoon was reproposed as a community boat for sunset cruises and fishing expeditions, with a rotating schedule of volunteer captains. I should have known it was too good to last. 6 weeks after the lake use agreement was finalized, I returned from a business trip to find a thick envelope from the county planning department waiting for me. Inside was a notice of a hearing to consider a petition for eminent domain filed by the Oak Ridge County Parks and Recreation Department. The petition sought to declare Lake Serene a critical public recreation resource and transfer ownership to the county for the greater public good. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I called Lisa immediately. "This has Pristine written all over it," she said after I explained the situation. "They couldn't beat you directly, so they're trying to get the county to take the lake." "Can they do that?" I asked. "Eminent domain is a powerful tool," Lisa admitted, "but they need to demonstrate a compelling public interest, and they have to offer fair market value compensation. This is a private lake that's been in your family for generations, not an essential waterway. They'll have a hard time making that case, unless they have friends on the county commission," I pointed out. Lisa was silent for a moment. "Let me make some calls. In the meantime, we need to rally the community again. If enough residents speak against this at the hearing, it could make a difference." I hung up and immediately called Judge Wilson to inform her of this new development. Her reaction surprised me. "I already knew," she said grimly. "Commissioner Langley called me this morning to give me a heads up before the notices went out. He seemed to think I'd support the move since it would guarantee lake access for all residents." "Do you?" I asked, suddenly uncertain of her allegiance. "Absolutely not," she replied firmly. "This is a blatant abuse of eminent domain," and I told him so. "The lake use agreement is working perfectly well. This is just Pristine trying another angle. So what's our strategy?" I asked. "Full court press," she said. "The interim board will issue a statement opposing the petition. We'll encourage as many residents as possible to attend the hearing, and we'll need solid legal representation." "Lisa's already on it," I assured her. "Good. And James, there's something else you should know." "What's that?" "Marcus Whitfield was a major donor to Commissioner Langley's last campaign, and guess who just applied for permits to build a massive new development on the north side of the county?" The pieces clicked into place. Pristine Properties. Exactly. This isn't just about Lake Serene anymore. This is about sending a message to anyone who might stand in the way of their future projects. Over the next few days, Lisa and I prepared our legal arguments while Judge Wilson rallied the community. To our surprise, almost all the residents were opposed to the county takeover. Even those who had initially supported Brenda's efforts against me had come to prefer our negotiated agreement to government control. The day before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor at my cabin. A sleek black SUV pulled up my gravel driveway, and a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit stepped out. "Mr. Mitchell, Marcus Whitfield. I was hoping we might have a word." I invited him in with wary politeness. After refusing my offer of coffee, he got straight to the point. "This situation has gotten out of hand," he said smoothly. "My daughter-in-law overstepped in her enthusiasm for protecting the community. I'd like to find a resolution that works for everyone." "We had a resolution," I replied, "the lake use agreement. Until you engineered this eminent domain petition." He spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I assured you, the county's actions are their own, but I might be able to help persuade them to reconsider, if we can come to a private arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "Simple. You sell the lake, to me personally, not to Pristine. I'll pay double its appraised value. You keep your cabin and a generous easement for your boat. The HOA gets guaranteed access in perpetuity. Everyone wins." I studied him for a moment. "And if I refuse?" His smile never wavered. "Then we see what the commissioners decide tomorrow. I've found that public servants are often sympathetic to the needs of job creators in the county. But litigation can drag on for years, Mr. Mitchell. Years during which you might find your lake access complicated." The threat was clear. "I'll consider your offer," I said noncommittally. "Excellent. My attorney will wait for your call until noon tomorrow." He stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Mr. Mitchell. This conversation was between gentlemen. I trust it will remain private." After he left, I immediately called Lisa and Judge Wilson, putting them on speakerphone as I recounted Whitfield's visit. He practically admitted to manipulating the commission. Lisa said incredulously, "That's textbook corruption." "But impossible to prove without recording the conversation." Judge Wilson noted, "It would beat his word against yours." "Unless," I began, a plan forming rapidly. "Unless what?" Lisa prompted. "Unless we can get him to repeat his offer in front of witnesses." The next morning, the county commission chamber was packed. Residents of Lake Serene Estates filled most of the seats, with a contingent of Pristine employees and supporters in another section. Local media lined the walls, alerted by Lisa to the controversial nature of the hearing. Commissioner Langley, a florid man with the practiced smile of a career politician, called the meeting to order. After introductory formalities, the county's attorney presented the petition, using carefully selected phrases like public recreational resource and broader community benefit to justify the proposed taking. When it was our turn to respond, Lisa delivered a masterful presentation on the history of my family's ownership, the successful community agreement already in place, and the suspicious timing of the petition coming immediately after Pristine's legal defeats. "This is not about public good," she concluded firmly. "This is about a private developer using government power to accomplish what they couldn't achieve in court." The commissioners' faces remained impassive, but I noticed several glancing uncomfortably at Whitfield, who sat confidently in the front row. Next came public comments. One by one, residents of Lake Serene Estates approached the microphone to speak against the petition. Even those I had never met expressed support for our agreement and opposition to a county takeover. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I approached the podium with a folder of documents and a clear plan. "Commissioners, my family has owned Lake Serene for over 70 years. We've been good stewards of this natural resource, and we've now established a fair agreement with the surrounding community for shared enjoyment of the lake. There is simply no legitimate public interest in forcibly transferring this private property to county control." I paused, looking directly at Commissioner Langley. "However, I've recently been approached with a private offer that sheds light on the true motivation behind this petition." Whitfield straightened in his seat, his confident expression faltering. I continued, "Last night, Marcus Whitfield, founder and CEO of Pristine Properties, came to my home. He offered to buy the lake for double its appraised value if I would withdraw my opposition to his company's activities. He implied that if I refused, he could ensure the commission would vote in favor of this petition because of his influence as a major donor and job creator. Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber. Commissioner Langley's face flushed deep red. "That's a bald-faced lie," Whitfield called out, rising to his feet. "I made no such offer." I opened my folder and pulled out a document. "I anticipated your denial, Mr. Whitfield. That's why, after our conversation, I had my attorney prepare this affidavit detailing your comments. I signed it under penalty of perjury." Lisa stepped forward with additional documents. "We also have phone records confirming Mr. Whitfield's visit to my client's residence at the time in question, and testimonies from 2 neighbors who observed his vehicle. It wasn't conclusive proof, but the implication was clear enough to cast serious doubt on Whitfield's denial. Furthermore," I continued, "we've prepared a comprehensive timeline showing the close correlation between Pristine Properties' campaign contributions and favorable decisions by certain commissioners." I didn't look directly at Langley, but I didn't need to. "This is outrageous," Whitfield sputtered. "You have no right to make these accusations. Actually, public comment on matters of public concern is precisely what this forum is for," Judge Wilson interjected from the audience. "And as a former judge, I find Mr. Mitchell's allegations deeply troubling and worthy of investigation." The chamber erupted in chaotic discussion. Commissioner Langley banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. When the noise finally subsided, he cleared his throat nervously. "In light of these concerning allegations, I move that we table this petition pending further review." "I second the motion," another commissioner quickly added, clearly wanting to distance herself from the controversy. The vote was unanimous. The petition was tabled indefinitely, effectively killing it without forcing the commissioners to take a definitive stand. As the crowd began to disperse, I found myself face to face with Marcus Whitfield. His earlier charm had vanished, replaced by cold fury. "You've made a serious mistake," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled rage. "This isn't over." "Actually, Mr. Whitfield, I think it is," came a new voice. We both turned to see a woman in a crisp suit flanked by 2 serious-looking men. "Marcus Whitfield, I'm Special Agent Rivera with the FBI. We'd like to ask you some questions about your relationships with county officials and potential violations of federal corruption statutes." Whitfield's face went ashen. He looked from the agent to me and back again. "This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong." "Then you'll have no problem answering our questions," Agent Rivera replied calmly. "We've been investigating certain development practices in this county for some time. Today's events have accelerated our timeline." As Whitfield was escorted out, not under arrest, but certainly not free to leave, Lisa joined me with a look of amazed satisfaction. "Did you know about the FBI investigation?" I asked her. "Not specifically," she admitted, "but I had heard rumors about the feds looking into development corruption in several counties. I may have made a few calls to former colleagues after Whitfield's visit last night." Judge Wilson approached with a broad smile. "Well played, both of you. I think we can safely say the lake is secure now." As we walked out into the afternoon sunshine, residents of Lake Serene Estates, my neighbors now, not adversaries, stopped to shake my hand or offer congratulations. Alina Chen gave me an impulsive hug. "Thank you for not giving up," she said warmly, "not just for yourself, but for all of us." Looking over the crowd toward the sparkling water of Lake Serene in the distance, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My grandfather would have been proud. 1 year later, the autumn leaves created a kaleidoscope of red and gold reflections on Lake Serene as I guided my grandfather's Chris Craft slowly around the perimeter. The old boat's engine purred contentedly, the mahogany gleaming in the late afternoon sun. So much had changed in a year. The FBI investigation had uncovered a pattern of corruption extending far beyond Lake Serene Estates. Marcus Whitfield and Commissioner Langley were both facing federal charges, along with officials from 2 neighboring counties. Pristine Properties had been sold to a competitor after its stock plummeted. Brenda and Richard had moved away shortly after the county hearing, their reputations in tatters. I occasionally saw their names mentioned in the ongoing legal proceedings, but they had no power over Lake Serene anymore. As for the community itself, it had undergone a remarkable transformation. Judge Wilson had been officially elected HOA president, bringing her judicial temperament and ethical standards to the role. Under her leadership, the association had rewritten its bylaws to prevent the abuses of the past and had established a more collaborative relationship with me as the lake's owner. The lake use agreement had worked beautifully. Residents enjoyed swimming, fishing, and paddling across the clear waters, while my ownership rights were respected. The once antagonistic security boat had been reproposed as a community vessel used for sunset cruises and fishing expeditions. My cabin remained my private sanctuary, but I was no longer viewed as the enemy. I had even made genuine friends among the residents. Jim Harrington and I regularly fished together, and Elena Chen's grandchildren loved to wave at the fancy boat whenever I passed by. As I rounded the south bend of the lake, I noticed something new on the community dock, a small bronze plaque catching the sunlight. Curious, I steered closer. The plaque read, Lake Serene, privately owned since 1953, shared in friendship since 2024, with gratitude to the Mitchell family for their stewardship. I felt a lump in my throat as I cut the engine and drifted closer. Judge Wilson stood on the dock, waiting with a smile. "Do you like it?" she called as I approached. The community voted unanimously to install it last week. "It's unexpected," I admitted, securing the boat to the dock and stepping up beside her. "We wanted to acknowledge that your standing your ground ultimately led to something better for everyone," she explained. "If you had given in to Brenda's bullying or sold out to Whitfield, this community would be very different today." I gazed across the lake to where my cabin sat nestled among the trees, just as it had in my grandfather's time. He would have loved this, not the fighting, but the resolution. He always said a man should stand his ground, but know when to extend a hand. "Wise words," Judge Wilson agreed. "Oh, I almost forgot why I was waiting for you. The Community Fall Festival is next Saturday. We were hoping you'd be the one to judge the boat decoration contest." I laughed. "Let me guess. Brenda banned boat decorations as tacky." "Strictly prohibited under penalty of excessive fines," Wilson confirmed with a chuckle. "Now we're making it an annual tradition." That evening, as the sun set over Lake Serene, I sat on my dock with a glass of my grandfather's favorite whiskey. A few kayaks and paddleboards still dotted the water, residents enjoying the last warm days before winter. From across the lake, a family on their deck waved to me. I raised my glass in return, feeling a sense of community I hadn't expected when this all began. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brenda and the HOA had wanted my boat removed because it was an eyesore that didn't fit their manufactured vision of lakeside perfection. In trying to force me out, they had instead revealed the corrupt foundation their community was built on. Now, my grandfather's boat wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated as part of what made Lake Serene special. And the lake itself, rather than being a battleground, had become a true centerpiece of the community, bringing people together instead of driving them apart. As darkness fell and the lights from the surrounding homes created a glittering necklace around the water's edge, I thought about how differently things could have turned out. If I had backed down, if I had sold my rights to Whitfield, if I had allowed myself to be bullied away from my family's legacy, none of this would exist. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about winning a fight. It's about creating the space for something better to emerge. The battle for Lake Serene had been difficult and often bitter, but the peace that followed was all the sweeter for it. I raised my glass one more time to the memory of my grandfather. "You were right, Grandpa," I said softly to the night air. "Some things are worth fighting for," and Lake Serene, now calm and beautiful in the moonlight, seemed to agree. The end.